Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Asian Hustle Network podcast. Today, we have a very special guest with us. His name is John Lim. John is the 27-year-old CEO and founder of Ugly LLC, an indie game studio producing niche specific cult classic card games, such as the best selling Asian American party game line, AZN FLUSH, and the ultimate game to inspire the best high conversations, Puff Puff Pass. John, who is the son of South Korean immigrants, was born and raised in Maryland. Growing up, John didn't have many Asian friends, and at one point he remembers feeling profoundly unlucky to have been born Asian. He had what he calls his Asian awakening in college thanks to an Asian student association. Upon graduating college, he went through a phase of not knowing what to do with his life, which was compounded by the pressure from his mother to get a real job. He moved to Korea for a year as a way to get closer to his roots and to buy time. He taught English to make ends meet. Eventually, he moved on to digital marketing, but he couldn't kick this urge to launch his own business, much to his mother's chagrin. Always a fan of card games and drinking games because it gave him an easy way to connect with others. In 2018, John decided to give it a go, and he created a game for other Asian Americans like him with just $500. Having sold tens of thousands of games, Asian Flush is now the best-selling game for Asian Americans. John has generated close to $3 million through his games since launching in 2018. John, welcome to the show.
Hi guys, thanks for the intro. I feel like I don't need to say anything anymore. You guys got the whole story right there.
I want to start by saying we are so proud of what you achieved in just 3 years and the game that you created. We see it everywhere. Honestly, we see it at our friend's house. We
Mm.
hear it mentioned all the time. And to be able to talk to you right now about you creating this board game, it's a true honor for you to have you on the podcast for sure.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, yeah, I don't know what to say. It's an honor for me to be on this podcast as well. I've kind of, I've had my finger on the pulse of Asian happenings online, and I've kind of witnessed Asian Hustle Network from where it was to where it is now. And so, props to you guys as well for, developing something amazing. And I'm happy we get to share this moment together.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And then let's kind of dive deep into it. Okay. So you mentioned in your bio that you were lost before creating this card game. Like, what was going through your mind during this time period, and what kind of pressures were you feeling from your family to like get a traditional job, and how did you sort of like convince yourself that this is the right path that you want to head down? Because a lot of people have trouble sticking to like with their dreams while getting a lot of pressure from their family. How did you manage this?
Yeah. Yeah. So the pressure was pretty high. I think it didn't help that, well, I've got two older, brilliant sisters. They are 7 and 10 years older than me. So always they were so far into the future and had their stuff together and, were doing well in school and pursuing these career paths that my mom really approved of. So my oldest sister is a doctor, and then the other sister is a pharmacist. And of course, the oldest sister married like a PhD biochemist. And, so there's just all this sort of like professionalism that my mom really wanted us to pursue. And, I did end up getting into a good college. I went to Swarthmore College, which is one of the better liberal arts schools in the country. And so I think part of it was like, oh my God, I have a mountain of school debt. I, graduated from this prestigious college. My sisters are doing so well. Um, Obviously, there was a lot of, pressure to want to kind of fulfill, I guess, my potential. I guess potential in my mom's eyes. I guess the competing factor there was so my dad did pass away when I was 13 years old. And that, well, I'm still dealing with that now in terms of what that really means, in terms of how I've turned out and maybe what some of my issues and strengths are. But I think one of the best things that came out of that was that, you know, I realized that, one day, and this is not new to anybody, but we all share the same fate as my father. I think the circumstances of how I passed away was difficult because it was an accident and it just kind of happened overnight. And so for most of my life, I tried to internalize this idea that, well, that could be me too. And so, am I going to, live and die in living a vision of my life that my mom set forth, or do I want to pursue things in a way that I know that I could, at least die happy knowing that I had at least tried. So that's kind of the two competing ideologies in my mind, and obviously the entrepreneurship route won out in my mind.
I'm so sorry to hear about your father, and I know that he must be, extremely proud of, what you're doing right now. And I think even though what you mentioned, I think a lot of Asians go through that same experience about like trying to fulfill our parents' dreams and goals for ourselves, right? Because a lot of them want us to be doctors and lawyers and take the conventional path to success. And a lot of the times when we actually do that, we don't actually feel fulfilled or happy, right? But you actually found something that was, right for you. And you mentioned that, before, when you were growing up in Maryland, you actually didn't even want to be Asian. Like, you actually felt embarrassed about that. um, Talk about your experience then, and like, did you go through an experience of like trying to find your Asian identity when you were growing up in Maryland, and how difficult was it for you at that time?
And I guess before we get to that
Yeah.
question, sorry
Mhm.
about that. I just want to comment on I mean, uh, losing a family member, it's very tough. And what you accomplished so far and the way that you took that, we have a lot to be proud of. And, I guess I can sort of relate to you because I have some deaths in my family as well. And I guess when you mentioned that mentality of and that mindset of knowing that this can all come down to an end at any time, it really keeps a person motivated. So it's so, and I think I'm still dealing with that as well, but it's so easy to go down the path of darkness. But the fact that you stayed
Mhm.
on the path and did amazing things, like 3 million in sales for AZN FLUSH, like hats off to you, man. We're proud of you for sure.
Yeah. One thing I want to comment on that, maybe this is getting too deep, but I think going down the path of darkness and also taking the path that I have, I think they're the same path. Like I felt I did go down a pretty dark path, but I feel like it was there that I kind of really forged a strong identity. And so without that, I don't think I get to the point where the business is doing well today. So I do want to at least mention that. And what was the other question, Maggie? You said about growing up in Maryland.
Yeah. Growing up in Maryland, what was your experience like at that time? And I know you mentioned, you didn't feel proud to be Asian at that time, right? And I can probably assume that you grew up in a predominantly non-Asian community. Is that right? And so, like, if that was the case, like, how was it like, kind of like growing into your Asian identity, and did you have a hard time dealing with it?
Yeah, so in my high school, so I went to a private school, and I think if I remember correctly, there were maybe 3 other Asians in my class, and then maybe like 15 throughout the entire school. There was never any sort of like Asian student club. There just really weren't enough of us to do anything like that. I guess to compound that, I grew up playing baseball for the first, I played in college. I played for 20 some odd years. It was a sport that my dad and I really enjoyed together. And that's also not sports aren't really a place where a lot of Asian Americans tend to be. So whether I was in class or whether I was out on the field playing baseball, I just really didn't have a lot of Asian American friends. And looking back on it, of course there were jokes that were made and you just kind of laugh them off. But as you get older, you kind of realize the concept of a microaggression and how that kind of compounds over your lifetime to shape how you feel about yourself and your ethnicity. And so, you know, for a long time, I felt othered. Like the first adjective you would think of when you were to describe me was Asian. At least for my friends, it wouldn't be like, oh no, he's like a smart, funny, witty kid. Like, no, he's the Asian kid. So there was, aspects of that definitely made me feel alone. That obviously it didn't help that there weren't other Asian kids to kind of like uh, commiserate with. But and so yeah, just for the first 18 years of my life, I was the one of the only Asians there, and I just kept on seeing ways that it was holding me back, like socially, especially.
And what was the turning point for you to sort of embrace your Asian identity and Asian culture and be like, you know what? Being Asian is pretty damn awesome. What was that turning point for you like?
I think it was in college when I had met some other Asian Americans and just realized how similar all of our upbringings were. Um, and on it, to segue to Asian Flush, that's kind of how that came to exist, was just like noticing all these subtle ways that we grew up a very similar childhood. And I felt instantly closer to these friends, even despite spending less time with them, just because I felt like they were just like me. I wouldn't say I ever got to a point where I felt like uh, that there were maybe certain characteristics about myself that were like tied to being Asian that I'm like extremely proud of. I would just say I felt more that there was like a community that I could relate to, and that gave me strength.
I'm really glad to hear that. And community is so important in order to like just feel like you belong, feel like you're not any different than anyone else. And I think some people actually go through life and never find that community, and it's really sad to hear. But I'm glad that you found it, and that was a turning point for you. And I think that no matter how good or bad every experience is, it feels like we, as entrepreneurs, you always draw on every single one experience, right? To be like, okay, like this is an opportunity to do something better or improve stuff for Asian or whatever Asian identity, Asian culture. And let's quickly talk about first before we get into like Asian Flush. I want to hear
Yeah.
why you chose the name Ugly LLC.
Oh. We were looking for like a short, pithy, like memorable name. And I guess we picked ugly just from the sense of like, with the connotation of ugly, there's a meaning of, unwanted or undesirable. And when I think about um, trying to break into creating products for niche communities, I felt that there was a common thread of feeling like the outcast, feeling like you're ugly, at least, to mainstream. And so as we're just thinking about like what is the theme, what is the guiding mission between all the games that we want to launch in the future, it's kind of just like as maybe as corny as it sounds, to embrace the ugliness. Because I think that's where truth lies. And when you see like your girlfriend without makeup for the first time, or like you get to really know somebody and they tell you all their dark stories and dark secrets, like that's when I feel like you truly get to know somebody. And so um yeah, that's why I called it that.
There's such a deep meaning behind your Ugly LLC.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great to
yeah.
know. Yeah, let's quickly talk about Asian Flush. As again, you started with $500 to start Asian Flush. How'd you do it? Like, walk us through the first step and everything. And how'd you come up with the prototype? How'd you test it? How'd you find your co-founders? We want to know everything.
Yeah, so I think the guiding principle of it all was the concept of a minimum viable product. But I think there's a layer that's even more minimally viable, and it's what is the um, minimal viable product you put out for distribution. So like, how can I test this idea in its minimal form? A lot of people go into like prototypes. I got to test it. I got to do all this stuff, but you really don't. You just have to. Well, what we did was we created a landing page, we created the concept for the game, and we just said, hey, we're going to ship this out in 4 to 8 weeks. Here's what the game is. Here's an example of some cards. Here's the artwork. Here's what the brand stands for, blah, blah, blah. And then we just started running ads to that landing page. And from the get-go, I don't know if you guys know anything about Facebook ads or how well versed you guys are in that, but the name of the game is to make enough in revenue so that you can pay for the cost of your ads. And then when you have that, you have just essentially a money printing machine. You pay for more for ads, you get more revenue, it pays for the ads, you get, it just kind of accelerates that way. And to my surprise, pretty much from day 2 of launching, we were at that point where, we were just trying to throw as much money as we could on the ads, because it was getting out to people and people were buying it. So we had no prototype. We did not test the game at all. Honestly, I had a friend do the artwork, and then I spent like 30 minutes at a cafe writing 10 cards, just looking at like Asian memes online and stuff that I thought was relatable. And yeah, it hit like pretty instantly.
I really like how action oriented you are, and just really getting it done. Most people be like, I have $500, prototyping is probably going to cost me over 1,000. it's not possible, right? And the fact that you're
Yeah.
like, you know what, let's think minimal viable product. Would this product even sell to begin with, right? That's hella ballsy.
Yeah.
That's hella like ballsy of you and courageous to like go out and pursue that idea. And that's something to commend for sure.
Thank you. I mean, there's definitely no lesson to learn from like how viral it went from the beginning. I wish I had like more like pain points and lessons to be like, oh yeah, you should avoid this mistake, blah blah blah. But yeah, I think the thing is just like everyone. Um, I don't know. There's just never gonna be a moment where you feel ready. There's never gonna be a moment where you feel like fully confident that this is the thing that's gonna work out well. And if you've launched enough things, you know that even if you do feel that confident, sometimes it doesn't work out either. So I figure just rip the band-aid off and just get it out there and see if people will actually, take their credit cards out and put their information in. If they could do that, then I mean, you're onto something.
Yeah, I mean, we hear that all the time. There's never a right time to be ready, and you just have to do it to even see if it will become successful. And Asian Flush did become extremely successful, and it became so viral. And I remember like during this one time when everyone was talking about it, and everyone put it on their Instagram stories and put it on their Snapchat, and everyone was playing this game. And I think like during that time when, Crazy Rich Asians was coming out and subtle Asian traits and all of these things like encompassing Asian culture, what do you think were like the few things that made it so viral? Because I think like in this creator economy now, a lot of people are trying to become viral, whether that be for like their personal brand or for their product, right? But a lot of people don't get to that virality and they're trying so hard. So what do you think was like one of the few things that made it become so viral to begin with?
Yeah, so I think there's two main components to it. Probably the first part was that it was just extremely relatable. And I think that really matches how the internet works now. I think back in the day, if you look at like Cards Against Humanity and even just some of the TV shows back then, it was really based on like being absurd, saying something crazy and just being like, wow, that is so out of the ordinary. This is hilarious. But as you started to see the internet sort of allow people to segregate into their own, micro communities online, you start to see like relatable humor and memes really start to pop up, where it's less about being super absurd and more being like, oh, I relate to that. And it's very subtle. And I didn't even know that that was something that I felt, but I do. And so that was kind of I guess when I'm writing any sort of card, that's kind of what I think about. Like, what is something that all Asians do? Maybe not all, but a lot of Asians do that they don't realize is common. So we kind of like mimicked that sort of meme format that was popular. What I think about it is like every card could correspond to like an actual meme. And then the other part, I think you alluded to it, as just like board games and card games are inherently very shareable. Like it's not something you play by yourself. You're going to play it with 7 to 8 people, maybe more, maybe less. And so if one pack gets out there and one person buys it, you figure probably gets exposed to 20 plus people. And so if it's a good game, then it's likely to spread.
I like that. And let's talk a little bit more about that too, because creating a concept and then creating a game that is easy to play and relatable to Asian culture is probably a lot easier said than done. So like let's talk through
Yeah.
your iteration.
Yeah.
Like I know you mentioned that you're at a cafe, you're finding an image, like 10 images. How did you get your friends to play this card game and give you proper feedback? Because what I realized among friends is you give them a product or an app or whatever, a game, and they're not going to try to hurt your feelings. They're going to be like, John, this is awesome. Right. And that's not the feedback that you need in order to create a successful product. So how did you get the initial iteration testing going? And how many rounds of iteration did you get before you're like, you know what? We're going to release this to manufacturing and get this printed now?
Yeah. So I did none of that. We had, thousands of orders and a timeline. And then actually the timeline of when we released was around Lunar New Year. So the factories were shutting down. So we really had to get the order in as soon as possible. So in lieu of testing, I did do a ton of research. and it's not research. It's called just looking at memes online. Spent hours and hours looking at memes online, figuring out what I thought was funny, mixed it up with experiences from my own childhood, and just put it into the deck. I mean, to me, like, I wasn't expecting Asian Flush to be viral at all. I was just like, oh, here's like a fun little side project, and I'm gonna just wing it. And if people like it, they like it, and if they don't, they don't. So the first iteration of the game had no testing done. Pretty much, I typed it out, checked for typos, and sent to the printer, and that was it.
You are a brave man and incredible.
I'm a little bit crazy. I think I'm a little bit crazy. I'm not gonna lie. I think it might be a little bit crazy.
That's crazy.
I'm happy to report our process is a lot more procedural now than it was in the past. I'll say that.
Yeah, that is insane. I've actually never heard that before, because we've had like friends who have came up with card games, and they went through like a whole iteration process of like testing it with friends and family to make sure, does this look okay? Does it sound okay? But, you went straight to the memes, and, obviously memes exist because people relate to them, and there's so much relatability to them, and memes can become so viral because people are like, oh my God, that's exactly what I relate to, or like, that's exactly what happened to me. And I think what's so interesting about Asian Flush is that it actually attaches onto some like deep-seated issues in the Asian culture and Asian family too. Like the whole like parent-child dynamic of like, it being a source of trauma for some people too. Like, for example, if you were pre-med at one point, take 4 sips or something like that, or if you had to calculate the lowest grade you need to get to keep an A, take a couple of sips or something like that. And it makes people think like, oh my gosh, that happened to me, and it like triggers some type of trauma. Like, man, my parents
you just trigger all my trauma
time.
too just now.
We should drink. We should have some sips.
we might actually bring the flush to Asian Flush. Maggie gets kind of red.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Okay, so here's my theory on Asian Flush. Some people are very embarrassed to have it. I think it's like the greatest thing to have.
It is. You actually don't have to drink as much because people are like, oh my gosh, you're drunk already.
Yeah, you're drunk, you're having a good time. They just know you're having a good time. It's like I don't know. It's like you're wearing like a sign on your face. I'm having a great time right now.
Again, we're not advocating for alcoholics in our podcast. We're just mentioning
true.
this is also a party game.
Yeah.
So I know you mentioned the word "we" a lot of times as you mentioned the game. Do you have co-founders, and what is your co-founder relationship like? How'd you find them? And I mean, are they still part of the journey today?
So I do have a partner. Her name's Carolina, but it's not the way it works is that I told her, here, you go launch the Latino version of this game. So she owns that. I own Asian Flush. We still talk regularly. But I mean, at this point, it's just me running Asian Flush, and she runs, her game's called Tragos. And so we both launched roughly around the same time. Mine came out probably about like 2 months earlier, and then she ended up launching Tragos after. But I don't know. That's also just a habit. Whenever I talk about stuff that like the company is doing, I always say we for some reason. But
no worries. We is a great way to mention it. It's better than I for sure. But yeah, I mean, let's talk. You're a one-man show, man. That's really impressive. Let's talk a little bit more about the challenges you face along the way. Has there ever been any time where you're just like, you're not getting enough sales, or something is going wrong, or people just writing bad reviews? Like, how did you overcome these challenges? Because entrepreneurship is not as glamorous as a lot of people think it is. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of dark moments of just being sad. And, like, let's talk a little more about your struggles.
Yeah, so right now I'm kind of approaching, I guess, the life cycle of the business where, I don't know, I've been in it a few years and kind of understand what it's going to take to make this last, I don't know, 10, 20 years, if it even lasts that long. But I'm realizing that the games business is a hits-based business. It's like being an author or being a musical artist. You have to spend a lot of time working on the next hit, because your current hits they're going to fade over time. Like, eventually everyone who will ever want to play Asian Flush will get the opportunity to play it. And either, I guess, even the expansions, some of them will play, but at a point in time, it will not be interesting to people anymore. And so it'll be up to me to think about, okay, well, what's the next big hit? And the pressure of trying to figure out exactly what that is a lot, and certainly I feel overwhelmed a lot, because while Asian Flush, Puff Puff Pass, and Stay the Fuck Inside have taken off, there are 12 titles that I've launched in the last 2 years that have failed, and well, obviously no one's heard of those. And you hear what people say often about content creators. They always just notice the negative comments, never the positive ones. So if I were to correlate that to successful launches versus unsuccessful launches, I definitely feel the weight of our failures more significantly, and it definitely adds pressure to, okay, well, that one didn't work, why didn't it work, what's the next one? But you never actually really get the clear feedback as to why something didn't work. You just have to guess and figure out how to improve that part of the process. So right now we're going through that, and we're trying to think about, oh, well, what should our next title be? And unfortunately this year, while we are living off the success of our launches in 2020, we didn't have a single successful launch in 2021. And so that certainly, adds pressure to it all.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that. It's we rarely talk about our failures like that, and the fact that you're sharing that with us shows that how you are as a leader. And you're absolutely right. This industry is very hard, and any industry that you choose is difficult in their own way, right? And what you did mention is your sense of awareness, right? How did you develop your sense of awareness for like new ideas and new products? Was this something that was like acquired over time? Was it naturally to you? Like, how did you get a pulse of like what your target audience is, and how do you identify your target audience?
Yeah, that's a really complicated answer, because I guess it's like, when does inspiration truly strike for you? And I can't say that there's really a particular moment where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna schedule an hour for myself to sit down and think about it every day. It's more of like a constant 24/7 process of just digesting what's happening in the world and thinking about, what could we make from that. Um, sometimes it's in the shower, sometimes it's when I'm having drinks with a friend, or it's the randomest times when the idea comes. But I would say the thing that I try to do most consistently is to just digest as much information as possible. Like I'm always, I am always on my phone. I'm always on my phone, always on Twitter, always on YouTube, always on Instagram. I'm always keeping up with the news, everything, just trying to keep track of what's happening in the world and what's popular and what's trending. And TikTok's another good one. And maybe I'll have a couple theses a month where, oh, maybe this will work, and I'll explore the idea a little further, realize it's not the one, and kind of go through this like very chaotic process of trying and start and stop over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, like Brian mentioned, like, thank you so much for even mentioning about the failures that you went through. It's very heroic for people to like even mention that to begin with, because I feel like especially in the Asian community, we don't talk about those, and we never want to talk about them because it's all about like saving face, right? We always want to talk about our successes, and we never want to talk about our failures. But it's we commend you for talking about them, because it teaches us a really big lesson, and it shows us like the whole picture, right? Because all we hear about is Asian Flush and Puff Puff Pass and Stay the Fuck Inside. But if we're able to express the fact that we do have failures, people might have a different perception on them. Like a lot of people think, oh, these people made it so big because they just like got lucky, and just had like a hit wonder, and they just became successful based on that one game. But they don't see what goes on behind the scenes. They don't see all the times that they have failed and all the tries that it has to take. You mentioned that your mother, before she wanted you to go into like a very conventional path to success. Did you talk to your mother about the success of Asian Flush, and how did she take that, and what does she think of the game now?
So actually, she's been involved with the running of the business since the beginning. So but we didn't have a fulfillment center when we first started, and so it was literally her packing and shipping out all the orders. And so we did end up trying a third party fulfillment center. It absolutely sucks. I don't recommend it. And so we shifted it all back in house again. So my mom is still actively a part of the business, and actually she's quite busy with all the Cyber Monday and Black Friday sales happening. Um, I think the thing that she was trying to protect me from was not. I don't think she actually wanted me to, be a doctor. I think she wanted to shield me from the stress of being an entrepreneur, because she, had a small business growing, in America, and so she knows what that's like, to be on the grind always, like never taking a vacation and never truly being able to enjoy yourself, and never being able to like fully check out of work, really. And so I think she understood the grind of that. I'm only like 5 years into it, right? But she's experienced that grind for 25 years. Well, probably more, but just the grind of having to keep the business going. And that's something that, probably a lot of people don't want to talk about, but that's probably the hardest part. Well, obviously the hard part is creating a good business, but maybe the second hardest part is like keeping it going for 20 years, like being happy, healthy, like really not letting entrepreneurship burn the candle at both ends, so to speak. And so I think that's what she was protecting me from. Well, now, and I think now that it is going well, she's, she hasn't mentioned becoming a doctor. Sometimes she does say, "Hey, do you ever want to go to like business school or something?" But I think now pretty much she's proud.
Wow, I'm so glad to hear that. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because Brian and I, we talk about that all the time. Like, our Asian parents, they had to become entrepreneurs because that was their only choice. They didn't have any other option. And a lot of them had opened up restaurants, had opened up their own, mom and pop store, selling appliances, whatever. But that was because they didn't have any other option, and they knew how difficult and how complicated it was. And they didn't want us to go through the same experience. So all they know is like, becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer is the only safe route. So that's what I want for my kids. I don't want them to go through the same similar struggle as I did, but at the end of the day, they're just trying to look out for us, because that's really
Totally,
all they know.
absolutely.
I have to say the grind is real, as an entrepreneur. It's like you think about all the time. You sort of have just panic attacks randomly. You're like, oh no, something's not going right.
Yeah, totally.
In the bigger picture, it's mostly all in your head.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I know you mentioned earlier that you do consume a lot of content. How do you find a balance between John time and business time? Because that seems to be the hardest part about being an entrepreneur, because we're always on the grind.
Yeah.
We're always hustling. But unfortunately, there's a sign back. You guys can't see it if you're listening to the podcast, but it's always hustling in the back. Yeah. We're going to talk more about like balancing your life and your boundaries and everything. How do you manage everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to have hobbies that are active, that consume all of your attention, that that are also, I guess, productive. But at the end of the day, their main purpose is to just give you your mind a break. And so I do have a few of those. I work out a lot. No, not a lot. It depends on. It's all relative, right? But I work out 3 times a week. I have become obsessed with cooking, so that part is really fun. You can't really do anything else while you're cooking. You have to you don't want to cut your finger off. So actually I've been exploring a lot of Korean recipes. So I've been making my own kimchi and just kind of recreate all of my mom's recipes that I really enjoyed. So that's actually been kind of fun, talking with her on the phone, sending her pictures, being like, does this look right? How much more should I put into this? But I think you have to have some of that other stuff that keeps you happy outside of work. And so I dive into those hobbies about as intensely as I dive into entrepreneurship. And that's what keeps me sane. The other thing that I've picked up recently this year is reading. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people read, but I find it's a really great way to turn the busy brain off. And I guess lastly, meditating. I did meditate a little bit before our podcast, so I could, have a clear mind. I've been incorporating that almost daily, and I think it's been working so far. The whole panic attack thing is very relatable, and I realized if I don't really focus on getting my mental health right, like I'm gonna die early from all this stress. So I read a lot of like self-help books, um, and try to do everything that they say to like keep your mind right. So that's like the other thing.
Yeah, just keep in mind that you're not alone, dude. We had so many people on the podcast already, and it's we all go through the same stuff. We just have to keep our mental health straight, because without that, like everything's no, your whole world's gonna crumble, right? And I'm glad you're
Yeah,
taking
totally.
proactive steps to like meditate, read, work out, cook. Very relatable to me as well. I also do all those things, and
Hmm.
we're proud of you, man. Thanks for sharing what keeps you sane, and setting boundaries for yourself is really important.
Hmm.
So, John, how do you feel like you have grown as a person as well? Because I'm sure, like, just, creating all of these games as it relates to, the Asian culture, I'm sure your perception of the Asian culture has changed as well, as it relates to yourself. And I'm sure you get like a ton of feedback too from people who have played the game and talk
Hmm.
about like, wow, I've had to dive deeper into my cultural heritage and learn more
Yeah.
about myself and my family and how it relates to like my relationship with my parents as well. But talk about like how you've grown yourself and just like mentally, emotionally, um, as it relates to your perception of the Asian culture.
Well, it's definitely a lot healthier than it used to be. Um, and I don't even know if it's like my own personal growth. I think it's just been great to like see Squid Game go off, and like anime pop off, and just see how much we are being embraced by culture now, or I guess by the world now. I guess I can't take any credit for that, and it's entirely external to me, and I haven't done really any sort of personal development for that to happen. But I definitely have a lot more healthy relationship towards it now than I did. um, I would say, um, I don't know, it's just a lot more healthy, and I am trying to both heal my own trauma of growing up Asian American, but also getting older and understanding where my parents came from. Because I think that's the other important part is like, well, you acknowledge that there was trauma, and then you also acknowledge that they were a person going through their things, and so you really can't hold them at fault for I guess for creating that. They were just trying to do their best that they could at the time, and so I guess kind of straddling that fine line is something that I'm still trying to work on now. Um, I think it has been really nice. Uh, trying to, I think the one thing that I have been really trying to do over the last couple of years is to really create a strong relationship with my mother, not in from like a mom to son relationship, but like actually trying to hear like what are her struggles and like what is she dealing with right now, because she's got a ton of stuff on her plate. She's getting older. I'm sure that has a certain amount of stress. Obviously specifically to her, she doesn't have a life partner, so what does that really look like for her in the next couple decades, in the last couple decades of her life? um I don't know, I rambled, but that's where it
Oh,
is.
I love that. I love that you're trying to build that relationship with your mother. And I think we often forget that as we're growing older, they're growing older as well.
Hmm.
And it's true. Like there is a lot of generational trauma involved in families, but we often forget that, maybe they were put into situations that they couldn't even control, and oftentimes that is
Hmm.
true. And they had their own trauma as well, and oftentimes that gets kind of passed down to us, but
Hmm.
I think they were trying to make the best situation out of what they had at that time as well, just like how we are, and sometimes we just have to remember to, check in on them because,
Hmm.
their time on this earth is shorter than the time that we have on earth, right?
Totally, yeah.
We're all human, at the end of the day.
Hmm.
We all have the same desires. So I'm glad that you're spending a lot more time connecting with your mom. I'm kind of curious too. I know this issue happens to a lot of founders about having your company become your identity, right? It's like John's the founder of Asian Flush, or everywhere you go, everyone knows introduce you, John, the founder of Asian Flush. How do you separate your identity and self-worth from your company to who you are as a person? Because it's so easy to attach yourself to the sort of successes or failures of your company, right? And you're like, oh my God, I'm totally a failure because my company's not doing well. I'm very successful. If that gets to your head, because my company's doing well. how do you separate that part of your identity to yourself personally, at least, in order to keep yourself like separated and set boundaries and know who you are as a person?
Yeah, so there's a lot of layers to that, I think. Obviously, a lot of us as entrepreneurs pursue things because they are a big part of us and represent our interests. Um, and then obviously there are a lot of ups and downs with that because, based on the successes and failures of that. I think probably the most helpful thing is just having a really strong group of friends around me where I'm not John, the creator of AZN FLUSH. I'm just, John to them. And so, by I think focusing on creating strong relationships with them, it kind of keeps me grounded and more focused on like what life really is. And then there will be moments where I do have to go to like an event and be like, oh, I'm John, the creator of AZN FLUSH, and I'm gonna have to like play that character for a bit. But yeah, I would say it's really just having friends that ground me, that keep me away from getting too tied up into it. And then I think the other part is just true for everybody, where there's a lot of attachment of our identity onto the things we've done and the places we've been, and I guess the items we have and are able to buy. And that's just, I guess, a personal journey for any human to kind of detach from. And I think a lot of that comes down to like trying to acknowledge your self-worth as a person, just inherently, just that you exist, you have value, and are worthwhile. And so, that's the other part where it's like, I really am trying to focus on that. And that's really hard for Asian Americans, especially because we're always taught like, oh, you got to get good grades and that's how you get attention from your parents. So you have to exceed and you have to do really well or you're worth nothing. And so trying to unlearn that is the other aspect of that I'm really focusing on.
Man, you have such a deep understanding of your identity and life. So it's so refreshing to hear that. And thank you so much for sharing that. You're absolutely right. You do need friends that keep you grounded. I personally experienced something like that too. It's just like I'm just a normal person, that normal friend that you had in the past,
Yeah, just a guy. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It definitely goes a long way, man. So I guess since we're nearing the end of the podcast, what if you can redo any part of your journey, which part would it be and why?
Hmm. I mean, I guess the cliche answer is that none of it, because then I don't end up here if I don't take that path. But looking back, is there something that could have kept me from a even better path? I think it's probably the self-confidence piece. I think that you always see like there's a level of extreme narcissism with some of these like billionaire founders. And I'm not saying that I want all of that, but maybe if I had like, a couple more percentage points of that into me inherently, maybe some of the things I've done would have turned out even better than they have right now. I'm not sure where I get that 2 or 3% of it, but there seems to be a correlation there where there is like a strong belief in yourself and the things that you do um, that lead to success. So
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I do want to know, what's next for you, John, in like the next 5 years. Like, what do you hope to, have achieved in the next 5 years for yourself as well as for all of the games that you have lined
We'll
up?
make sure to get you back on the podcast in 5 years so you can reshare with us again.
That would be great. Hopefully we're all still running by then. So next, immediately, I want to, in case you can't tell, I've been like really into like self-care and like self-development lately. Like I feel like I'm quoting from the books I've been reading lately. But I do want to launch a brand around mental health self-care. From a business perspective, the industry has, I think, grown 10x since 2014. I think it was like, I don't want to quote this, but maybe it was like 2 billion to 20 billion or something like that. So that business is rapidly growing. And actually, I think demographically speaking, millennials, in terms of healthcare, their mindset is like, how do I not go to the doctor, essentially? So a lot of people, in lieu of pursuing actual healthcare and treatment, are, going towards, quartz crystals and like affirmation
Yeah.
books and stuff like this. So I do want to launch something around that concept, because it's what I'm interested in now. It's very personal. And if there's anything that I can extract from these books that I've been reading and put it into like a really nice condensed form for people to get a lot of value out of, and that's something I want to create. And then after that, I don't know how many more games I have in me. I think I might pursue something else, whatever that something else is. But I am feeling like there's another chapter that's about to start. So I'm not really sure what that will be, but I'm like open to all the possibilities and really spending a lot of time thinking about that now.
Love it. We're so excited for all of the plans that you have lined up. And I love that you're going into the mental health space, because there's like such a big stigma around it, and we rarely talk about it. But I think we're getting into a time where it's talked about a little bit more now, especially after the pandemic, and a lot of us seeking help from things that we've experienced through the pandemic. So I'm really glad you're going into that space. So this is our last question for you, John. And if you could give one advice to an aspiring entrepreneur, what would that one advice be?
This is just because it's top of mind, but it's to hire your mom. People always say that no one will care about your business as much as you do. I think your mom might be the one person who does. And so she's been great. She cares about it like it's her own business, because it is, I'm her baby and she wants me to do well. So hiring her has been the best decision I've ever made. And it also feels really great to be able to like provide for your mother too. So
I love it. I love that advice. I think that's the first time we had that advice on this podcast, but it's so true. And it actually keeps them busy, like
yeah.
A lot of our moms are probably retired by now, and they oftentimes want to do something, and that's like the perfect time for them to do something.
And it gives us something to talk about. Like otherwise, like, we might call your mom once a month, but I think due to the business, we talk a couple times a week, which I think is really nice.
Yeah, I love that. So John, where can our listeners find out more about you and all of your games online?
Yes, so you can find AZN FLUSH on Instagram at AZN FLUSH game. You can find my stoner game, which I know we didn't get to talk about. It's called Puff Puff Pass, and you can find that at Play Puff Puff Pass on Instagram. Links to the site will be there. The links to my Instagram will be on there too if you want to follow me. And I think that's it. I think those are all the links.
Awesome. We will leave all of those in the show notes for this episode. Just wanted to thank you so much for being on our podcast today, John. We had such a great time learning about your story.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'd love to come on again in 5 years.
We'll make sure to have you on.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, John. And thank you again so much for sharing your story with us. We look forward to seeing all your future successes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.